Welcome back, everyone, to another video where we take a look at the current events, and obviously the most in our faces current event right now is the ongoing war between the United States and Israel and Iran. We've covered a couple of videos about this topic already, and as promised, we're going to continue to do it as I once again look at the list of the videos that are being watched by audience members of this channel, and it's pretty much all to do with Iran. So it's what you guys are talking about, it's what you guys are watching, so we're going to continue no more than maybe once a week to talk about this. So the big question I think a lot of people have right now is, what's really going on? Who's winning? Is anyone winning? Is there an end in sight? Is there an exit strategy? What's the plan? Those are all fantastic questions, and I think like everything else, it depends entirely on who you ask. If you ask Iran's state media, they would tell you that they're winning and winning easily, and the United States is losing, and it's just a mess, and Israel is going to fall apart, and it's the end of the world. If you obviously listen to the administrations in Israel or here in the United States, they would tell you everything's going exactly according to plan, and we're winning and winning easily. And somewhere in the middle is the truth. Obviously, even people, commentators in the media, all have their own biases, all have their own motivations, all have their own agendas. So what is really going on? What is the status of all of this? That's where we're at. And so we'll go back to our friends over at Warfronts who have a video that just came out in the last 2 days. It says, here are the facts. Who's winning the Iran war? I'll put the link in the description. You can check it out without my commentary, see everything else that they've been posting. They've been doing pretty much daily content on this topic, so check it out. Let's dive in.
Across the last 2 weeks, the United States and Israel have laid waste to the nation of Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini is no more. The Iranian military is in complete disarray, and no matter what happens next, the future of the Middle East has already been changed forever. On a tactical level, Washington and Jerusalem have achieved incredible levels of success, securing air supremacy over a high share of Iran's territory and hitting the targets they want, whenever they want, with whatever ordnance they want.
And here's the thing with this, and it's something I've been experiencing in my own conversations with people about all of this, is that I think because there's such an expectation, such a belief by many people that the United States military is this uber powerful, technologically advanced juggernaut, that anything less than perfection gets viewed as some form of failure. I've seen people make comments to the effect of the fact that the United States has had any casualties at all is somehow a failure of U.S. leadership and reflects poorly on our generals and on our officers and on the administration. And I think we have to, like, whatever you want to say about the administration, and trust me, if you know me, you know I'm no fan of this administration, but to judge the success of a mission on whether or not there have been any casualties, they were very clear from the beginning, and I give them credit for being honest about this and saying, you know what, there will be casualties in all of this. I mean, no matter how perfectly you execute anything, things go wrong. There will be mechanical failures. There will be, the enemy. Let's not pretend that Iran doesn't have one of the top 10 largest militaries in the world, because they do. They're not a superpower, but they're not powerless. They're not a weakling. They will fight back, and they are fighting back, and they are taking people with them. I don't think that necessarily should be an indicator of the success of the mission. There are a lot of other ways to judge that.
After decades spent fighting a regional Cold War, Israel is reducing its archenemy to rubble, and the United States is so confident in its strength that Donald Trump has already declared victory.
Let me tell you, we've won.
But battlefield successes
Not yet.
by themselves, they're not enough to win the war. And right now, there is a massive gap between the US and Israel's tactical dominance and the strategic victory that the two allies are chasing.
And this is something we've seen throughout history, right? When you have a much more powerful enemy on one side, and you have somebody that is not able to kind of go toe-to-toe, but you just can't seem to beat them. That's what the United States was born out of, a situation where we faced down an enemy infinitely more powerful than us. But we fought irregular warfare. We fought this kind of never say die attitude where we just refused to to surrender and give in until we got some help from people like France and Spain and the Netherlands and others, and just outlast it. And that's what happened in Vietnam. It's what happened in Afghanistan a couple of times. They're just going to outlast. And so it is really, really difficult to see a situation short of the Iranian people themselves rising up and taking over their government, where the U.S. could really declare any sort of long-term success.
2 weeks of constant bombardment, the Islamic Republic still stands, and regime change is now a distant prospect. The Strait of Hormuz is shut down, and the wider Middle East, especially the oil-rich Gulf states, are still facing the constant threat of attack. Iran's new supreme leader isn't looking to compromise. In fact, he's more hardline than his father ever was,
and there's a lot of rumors right now about whether or not he's even conscious. I've seen all kinds of, and again, reports are impossible to figure out, right? Some people have said he's on life support. Some people said he's in a coma. Other people said, nah, he's just in hiding. He's fine. We don't know.
Rhetoric out of Iran over the past few days would indicate that Tehran has zero intention of backing down. With even a quick glance at the headlines, you'd know that the US, Israel, and their allies are winning the vast majority of the battles each day. But as for who's winning the war, that's a tougher question to answer. The case for the coalition. Now, when nations go to war, what defines victory? War isn't a competition. It's not some sort of contest of destruction where one side kills more enemies or destroys more targets, and so that side goes home with a trophy and the bragging rights.
If that was the case, the United States won dramatically in Vietnam. If you look at just the casualties on either side, if you look at the destruction caused by one side versus another, that's not enough to win. The United States lost most battles in the revolution, but won the war.
War is a means to an end. Nations go to war because they want something badly enough to fight for it, and because their enemy wants the opposite outcome badly enough to fight back. A fighting force can dominate the battlefield, it can outclass its opponent completely, but if its troops come home and its war effort ends before the fighting force gets what it came for, then they haven't won. The reverse is true as well. A fighting force can get torn to shreds, suffer incredible damage over the course of a conflict, and lose so much more than its adversary did. But if that fighting force achieves whatever it set out to achieve, they could still regard that outcome as a victory. Now, we are presenting this episode to argue one side or the other, or to tell fans of Trump, Netanyahu, or the Iranian regime respectively that their preferred fighting faction is barreling towards some inevitable defeat. We're asking the question, who's winning the Iran war? Because right now, the situation is inconclusive. The war's still ongoing, each side has a chance at achieving its core objectives, and the best we could do for now is to lay out the argument for each side to claim that it's gaining the upper hand, as well as the reasons that we should hesitate to accept those arguments at face value. We'll start with the US-Israeli coalition, where the easiest argument that Washington and Jerusalem are winning is an argument we've already laid out. The Americans and Israelis have achieved incredible tactical successes during their air campaign.
The last number I saw was something like over 7,000 strikes on Israel, like individual strikes between missiles and air sorties and things like that. I mean, that's a massive number.
By their accounts, they've killed dozens of Iranian leaders, plus thousands of Iranian troops and paramilitary personnel. They've sent a large share of Iran's navy to the bottom of the sea, and they've blown most Iranian air power out of the sky. A large portion of Iran's military infrastructure has been destroyed or heavily damaged. US and Israeli air defenses have achieved high success rates in defending the surrounding airspace, and control of the skies is now so complete that unstealthy US heavy bombers can fly over Iran with impunity. The United States has absorbed less than 10 fatalities on its own side as of the time of writing, as well.
And here's the thing, and I said, at the top, I talked about how we can't equate even a single U.S. casualty as being somehow a failure, but let's also recognize that whether it's an Iranian, an Israeli, or an American, or anybody else that's caught in the middle of this, one death, if it's your family member, it's a 100% casualty rate. If it's your husband, if it's your wife, if it's your mother or father, your son, it's complete. And your world is never the same, regardless of what side that is and who we're talking about.
There's 2 soldiers and 16 civilians acknowledged killed on the Israeli side, and while both nations have suffered damage to their military assets, they've dealt much more damage to Iran than both America and Israel combined have had to absorb. Iran cannot meaningfully challenge coalition air power, and it's been unable to draw the coalition into costly battles on the ground. Maybe the US and Israel haven't achieved all their objectives quite yet, but whatever you call this situation, they sure as hell aren't losing. Take a look at the basic objectives that Israel and the US seem to be pursuing: the destruction of the Iranian regime, the elimination of any Iranian threat to Israel or the wider Middle East, the end of Iran's nuclear program, and more. Yeah, we should acknowledge that there's some uncertainty about the coalition's wartime objectives, especially when it comes to the United States, but the broad strokes are obvious. No more Iranian ayatollahs threatening Israel, the US, or any of their allies in the future. For all the damage they've done, the US and
I will say, here's one thing I'll say in all this, is that if anything has changed now over the last year, it's that Iran at the very least now understands that the United States and Israel are willing to take military action if it comes to it. Whereas I feel like for the last 40 or so years before this, Iran has been like kind of a thorn in the side of the United States and Israel and others. It's been put up with. It's been, there have been, hardline stances taken, and things like boycotting and cutting them off, and sanctions and all that sort of thing, and negotiations, but never a great deal of military action, and that has certainly changed now.
Israel aren't all that much closer to achieving those outcomes today than they were 2 weeks ago, and perhaps even worse, it's not clear how they're going to get there. Take the issue of regime change. Depending on who you ask on a given day, coalition leaders may or may not describe a regime change as a core objective.
That's true.
At the very least, they'd like to make sure that Iran is ruled by people who aren't going to pose a threat in the future.
So I've tried to explain this. Listen, I get it. I'm somebody who tends to give people the benefit of the doubt, whether or not they deserve it. And so even when I found myself disagreeing strongly, say, with the Trump administration, I do try to... Like I'm not somebody who assumes the worst of motivations and assumes the worst of scenarios for anybody, whether it's Trump, Biden, Obama, Bush, anybody. And so I've seen a lot of this where there's been like unclear messaging about what the objectives are. And my own personal take on this has been, and this is just my personal take, I can't say this is what they're thinking or not thinking. I don't think anybody knows, is that the official, stated goals of this do not have to include regime change. I think the U.S. administration probably sees a scenario in which that doesn't happen, but they can still declare success has been had if, for example, we say that they are further away from having a nuclear program, things like that. That said, I think they also would very much like for there to be a regime change, and they would welcome that. And they're trying to create the conditions in which that is more likely. But I don't know that that's necessarily a make or break thing for this, that they have to have that and they won't stop until that's achieved. I don't know if that's the case. And I think maybe that's the cause of the mixed messaging, is what's official versus what we would really like to see happen kind of thing. I don't know.
Yet even though Iran's former supreme leader, his inner circle, and a high share of his allies up and down the regime have been killed, Iran's new leaders aren't moderating. In fact, Iran's new supreme leader, Mujtaba Khomeini, is more of a hardliner than his father ever was, and according to both Iranian and Israeli sources, he was elevated directly by Iran's very powerful Revolutionary Guard Corps. He is the chosen leader for an Iranian faction that's among the most ideologically opposed to the US and Israel in the entire country. The coalition does have tools to bring about regime change by other means, but those tools seem to be losing their potency.
And if you didn't see the previous video, I'll link it on the screen at the end. We did a video last week talking about the possibility of using Kurdish ground forces, several 100,000 of them that may or may not be poised and ready to go across the border. So we did talk some about that already.
The United States could kill Mujtaba Khomeini and his replacement after that, and so on and so forth, until they work their way down to a leader who's more willing to cooperate, like Delcy Rodriguez has been in Venezuela. But by Donald,
I think the difference here is that it's more than just one leader, right? I mean, you have a whole infrastructure in place. That's why I just don't think that it's as simple a matter as just continuing to cut the head off the snake. It's like a hydra. It's just going to grow a new one.
Trump's own admission, most of the people the US might have chosen for that role were killed in the first few rounds of airstrikes. At the start of the war, there was a lot of speculation that Iranian citizens could rise up, and Israel in particular has gone about bombing police and internal security installations, distributing weapons and small drones, and otherwise laying the foundation for an uprising. But that hasn't happened yet, partially because the destruction hasn't been extensive enough that Iranians would risk standing up to their leaders, and partially because Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu called for a popular uprising long before the conditions were set to support anything like that. When reports do trickle out from within Iran, it's clear that ordinary people are losing faith in the US and Israel's leadership and their ability to pursue critical objectives. And while the coalition might still support a Kurdish-led ground invasion, the element of surprise for that offensive has now been lost.
Yes.
According to Reuters, US intelligence concluded just days ago that after what was almost 2 weeks of bombing at that time, the Iranian regime is not at risk of collapse.
And here's a really good example of why you have to look past the headline, right? You know, a lot of people, we see the headline, we think we know exactly what it means, but the headline is just an interpretation of the story in the news article. And if you dig into the details, you'll often find out that the headline doesn't necessarily say what you think it says. Great example of this, completely apart from this kind of news, is a lot of the sports reporting these days. I see this constantly, where you see a headline talking about a potential trade that could happen between two teams. Let's say LeBron James going back to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And you're like, oh my gosh, is that something that they're really thinking about? Is that really being discussed? And then you read the article and you find out that the person who wrote the article, the sports reporter, is the one suggesting the trade. It's not anything that is even in the realm of actually being planned or discussed or in motion. It's just some person creating their own news story. And people see the headline and they run with it. So I read the articles that said this about U.S. intelligence says Iran government is not at risk of collapse, say sources. And while that is true, if you read the article, the source also acknowledges, but that could change tomorrow. Like basically, we don't see it right now, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be imminent. We just don't see any evidence of it. So it's a lot more nuanced when you start getting into the details of it all.
At the same time, coalition forces have been unable to stop some of the Iranian attacks that matter most: missile and especially drone strikes against key economic and infrastructural assets in the wider Middle East. Iran has caused severe damage and shutdowns at refineries and natural gas facilities across the region in places like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman. It successfully shut down the Strait of Hormuz, with ships now mostly refusing to pass through the waterway, and as a result, it's caused global energy prices to rise dramatically. It took Iran less than 2 weeks to force the world to release 400 million barrels of reserve oil, the largest market intervention in history, to stave off a complete economic panic. The coalition hasn't been able to wipe out the well-hidden stockpiles of long-range drones that have made Iran's destruction possible. That means Iran can continue threatening the region, paralyzing global trade and throttling energy markets, regardless of the fact that Iran has taken the worst of the damage.
And I have to believe that this was all anticipated, right? I mean, do you go into a situation like this without anticipating that that's what Iran's going to do in this scenario?
The US and Israel can still escalate in other ways. They could begin ground operations, either with limited objectives like assassinations or the capture of Iran's economically critical Karg Island, or by building up a troop presence on the border to create the threat of a larger invasion. They could target some of the infrastructure that allows the regime to function, as the coalition did on the 11th of March when it targeted a data center that supports the bank Iranian forces rely on to get their paychecks. But there isn't any guarantee that a regime collapse will come next, and certainly not that it would come quickly. To the extent that Trump's administration had domestic or international support for this operation, that support is already degrading. The newest set of public opinion polls on the conflict, as of the time of writing, showed that a majority of Americans outright disapprove of the war.
Yeah, but I think that was the case from the beginning. I don't think that that's something that has happened since the start. I think it's just always been that way.
Nationally, as French President Emmanuel Macron told a video call of G7 members this week, quote, "No one can tell what US President Donald J. Trump wants from this ongoing war with Iran."
That's fair.
End quote. According to Israeli sources, even Jerusalem is preparing for the possibility that the US could withdraw from the war suddenly without achieving any further objectives, and in that case, Israel would probably have to wind down its operations too. So this is where we ask the question. If the US withdraws sometime soon, and the overall situation looks like it does
It's a big
now,
if.
is that a victory? The case for Iran. When we turn to look at Iran's side of the equation, the things that are going poorly for Iran will be the things that are going well for the coalition and vice versa.
Right.
Regardless of anything else, Iran is most certainly getting its ass kicked right now. Its pre-war leadership has been demolished, its military has been degraded, and its long, slow economic catastrophe has gotten even worse. But unlike the...
All that said, going back to the parallel I used earlier, which isn't a perfect one, but it's drawing from history, 1776, the year the United States declared independence. By the time you get to November and early December, I mean, the U.S. it's about as bleak as it can get. That's why Thomas Paine writes, "These are the times that try men's souls," in a pamphlet called The American Crisis. Washington had been driven out of New York City. He had lost most of his army. It was basically all over. And yet it wasn't.
United States and Israel, Iran is pursuing the core wartime objective of survival. As of now, the Islamic Republic is surviving. And although it's clearly miscalculated in its attacks on the Gulf states and other regional governments, its basic theory of war with the West has been working. Iranian missiles, drones, and sea mines really did force a shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz, and they really did allow Iran to hold the global economy hostage. If Iran were fighting this war and trying to meet America or Israel's standard of victory, then it would have done a horrifically bad job. But Iran isn't doing that. They're pursuing a different set of objectives. And so it's held to a different set of standards. Iran's goal is survival, not of individuals or even of key leaders, but of the Islamic Republic itself. And right now, the Islamic Republic still stands. But for Iran, there's one critical problem. The war isn't over yet. Because Iran's goal is to preserve something rather than to defeat something, Iran can only achieve its goal once the conflict has ended. But although the coalition's destruction of so much Iranian capability doesn't mean Iran is fully defeated, it does mean that Iran is losing its ability to dictate when the conflict ends. If Iran can't make that decision, and it's already fighting a war, then it only has one choice. Hold on tight and hope that the coalition either decides that the cost of its war is too great, or...
Exactly what ends up happening with the British in the revolution. They decide that the financial cost, the cost in lives and materials, is just not worth it anymore. And that's exactly what Iran has to do, is decide, hang on until the U.S. and Israel decide it's not worth it. They lose too much support around the world. The pressure gets too great, and they have to cut their losses.
Or otherwise loses interest in fighting. Iran can impose costs of war upon the coalition. That's exactly what it's been trying to accomplish by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and attacking across the Middle East. But because of the arse-kicking that Iran has already received, its ability to impose those costs is growing weaker by the day.
True.
Nobody outside of Iran knows, for sure, what Iran has left in its arsenal, and at this stage of the war, Iran's leaders probably don't know either. But we do know that Iran has a finite number of missiles, a finite number of drones, and a finite number of launchers, not to mention the people trained to use them. Every time Iran launches its weapons, it reveals launch sites and infrastructure that could be tracked, targeted, and destroyed, meaning that the more Iran uses, the more it jeopardizes the warfighting ability it has left. As we've seen, Iran can destroy Middle East targets if it needs to, but Iran's strategy works best when its military capabilities are used as a threat, not as a tool of destruction.
Right.
If the war were to end tomorrow and Iran still had missiles, drones, and sea mines left over, then it could start making credible threats against the region immediately. The pull, however, is that Iran's adversaries know that, and Iran's targets know it too. According to reports from the Gulf states, although national governments feel burned by the US and Israel's decision to jeopardize regional security, their wishes are clear. If you're going to start this war, then make sure you finish the job.
Yep.
For Washington, Jerusalem...
And that does seem to be... I mean, I was actually a little bit personally surprised there wasn't more outcry against the actions of Israel and the United States, especially since Israel hasn't had built up exactly a ton of goodwill over the last couple of years in its response to October 7th. But yeah, by and large, I think most nations, especially in the West, would say good riddance if the Iranian regime was overturned. And if Trump's willing to spend what little political capital he has to do that, then they're all for it as long as it works.
Really, the entire Western world, it's basically the same calculus. Maybe this war was avoidable, and maybe the jury's still out on whether or not it was a good idea, but the worst thing the coalition could do now would be to back down.
Yep.
If that happens, then the Iranian regime survives. A more hardline government becomes entrenched.
Emboldened,
the country's
yeah.
entire strategy of regional disruption is rewarded.
The Iranian regime would benefit in major ways from surviving this. It would give them so much credibility when they're selling it to their own people as, look, no matter what, even big bad United States, even they can't get rid of us. We're here to stay. Just accept it, right? I mean, that would be the worst case scenario for the U.S. and Israel, I think, is it would have been better to never start this than to start it and have them still be there when it's over.
Meaning that this new, even more extremist leadership will double down for the next round. Hell, just imagine the implications for Iran's desire to build a nuclear weapon if conventional weapons can cause this kind of chaos. So, while there's a decent argument that Iran could declare victory today if America and Israel chose to end the war, Iran might also have shot itself in the foot and created a set of conditions where the coalition can't end its operations while the Iranian regime survives. Go back to this episode to start a question. Who's winning the Iran war? And there's not a very strong argument for either side.
No.
But the precise circumstances of the ongoing deadlock raise a far more dangerous question. Is Iran headed for a forever war, even if nobody, including the US and Israel, would actually want that to happen? At this point, the coalition is in too deep. They can't end this conflict while the Islamic Republic remains in place, or they'll validate Iran's entire approach to geopolitics while leaving the nation in the hands of an even more dangerous set of leaders. But Israel and the US inadvertently installed. But the Islamic Republic can't back down either. After all, their core objective is survival, which means that capitulating under any circumstances is the one thing they simply cannot do. Both the coalition and Iran have lost access to many of the tools they once thought they could use to defeat each other. Iran is running out of missiles, drones, and launchers, and it's already spoiled the tolerance of the Arab world. But the US and Israel seem to have lost their chance to prompt a revolution, to launch a surprise Kurdish offensive, or to elevate a hand-picked, cooperative Iranian leader. As Trump himself explained on Monday, quote, "We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough."
Okay.
That's not a situation that
means.
lends itself to an easy solution, or one that allows either the coalition or Iran to simply withdraw and claim victory regardless of the realities on the ground. It's a recipe for a much longer and much more intractable war that either side was betting on, a war that neither side is ready to win, and where in the end...
All right, I might have cut off his last word or two there. I apologize for that. But I thought that was really well done. I think that was a pretty good analysis of where the situation is right now. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, keep it civil. Let's disagree passionately, but do so in a way that's not disagreeable. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm going to put some suggested videos up here on the screen, including the one about the possibility of using Kurdish ground troops to achieve some of those goals we talked about. Thanks for watching.